Hello, my name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the world's top executives and management teams, helping them achieve bigger and more meaningful results than ever before. In this season, I'm speaking with C-suite leaders from around the globe to find out what the COVID-19 pandemic has taught them and what wisdom they have to share for other leaders. Welcome to Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times. In this conversation, I speak with Alun Baker. Alun is the CEO of Clario Tech, a business-to-consumer cybersecurity company. And in this discussion, Alun talks about, first of all, how he could find opportunity in such a saturated market filled with so many incumbents as a relatively small 800 or 900 person company, and really carve out something unique. We also then get into COVID and the whole pivot and navigation that Alun had to take the company through as part of that, and how he was able to bring the best out of people, how all problems in the business end up always being people problems, how all value in the business is created by people, and really what the fundamental principles are that Alun sees that really never go away and that he comes back to in all the different CEO roles that he's had. So I enjoyed this conversation. I hope you will too. Enjoy Leadership Lessons for Challenging Times with Alun Baker of Clario Tech. Hi, Alun.
Hi, Richard.
Great to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Actually, it's been a long time coming, so I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, indeed. Well, hey, before we jump in, why don't you give us some context? Just take a minute or two to explain, who you are and what Clario Tech is and does.
Yeah, so somebody once described me very recently, actually, in some media, a veteran of the technology industry. I'm not sure I like the veteran bit, but and what the connotations are. So yeah, I've been in IT sector for nearly 30 years and spent most of the last 20 years either transforming businesses or growing them. And I've been in everything from director in Oracle, acquired by Accenture. I've also been chairman of 4 companies, 3 of which went through successful exits. So almost everything I've done has been leading major type of high growth scenarios or going through some kind of significant transformations. For the last just under 2 years, I've spent a lot of time in Ukraine, believe it or not, looking at a business which we subsequently called Cromtech, that owned a product called MacKeeper, and which we subsequently acquired. I set a new company up in London called Clario Tech and acquired the IP and the resources of Cromtech. And we are about to launch a brand new product into the market in a couple of weeks' time, all around cybersecurity. So Clario Tech is, Richard, the only way I can describe this is what appealed to me is I looked at a market that was at least 10 years old, where all of the players in the market were doing the same thing and saying the same thing, and almost all of it was around antivirus. And my kind of philosophy in business has always been, once you get beyond the tech, tell me what the tech is doing to make a difference in business. What problem is it solving? Because unless you understand that, you don't understand the value of what you're delivering and how to deliver it. So what I saw was an industry, a sizable industry that was ripe for disruption, because unfortunately cybercrime has grown at 40% a year. And latest estimates are it will hit $6 trillion by the end of 2021. And business to consumer, which is what we're about, the consumer, is hugely misunderstood. And Clario is all about making it easy, using a completely different tone of voice, having a unique user interface that's like nothing in the market. We personalize it, so it's all about you. We talk to you as an individual, so it's, hey, Richard. That's how we engage with you. And we've also then integrated what we're calling human intelligence, which is a kind of a redirection from artificial intelligence. Because when you look at the market today, the headlines are about Facebook getting a $4 billion of total fines over the last few years, losing people's data, or British Airways losing people's data and getting a £185 million fine. They don't talk about the fact that hundreds of thousands of people's lives were affected by those data breaches. So even when it's about a consumer company losing data, they never talk about the true victim of a crime, which is a consumer. So Clario is all about taking a completely different approach. We don't talk technology, we talk about your money, your data, your browsing, your network. We don't talk about anything that confuses people. Okay. And for the first time ever, we're engaging you in cybercrime.
Got it. Okay, so it's cyber security for consumers in a quite a different way, different approach. Yeah. Fantastic. And as you say, it's a business which has got you're in London, but there's large number of employees I know in Ukraine. So that adds another level of complexity, I guess, to you as as an executive. So tell us a bit more. Obviously we're living pretty crazy times. 2020 has been an amazing year, not always for the good reasons, but what happened for you in this whole, the last couple of months? How has COVID forced you to adapt as a business? I mean, what's been the biggest challenges that you've had to wrestle with as the senior leader?
Yeah, it's really interesting because somebody once told me that cloud computing accelerated enormously in 2009 following the banking crash, because companies weren't prepared to make large capital investments. So cloud-based, buy as you eat or drink was suddenly appealing, and people got over some of the hurdles. And I think the big technological advance we're now going to see is remote working. Most companies have avoided it. They've avoided it with assumptions that productivity would fall. You'd have security issues, you'd have infrastructure issues. But fortunately, I think, there was a lot of tech arrived at the right time. Remote video conferencing grew up over the last 2 years. And now what we see, particularly for us, we actually didn't have a policy for remote working. And within 1 week, we moved 830 people to remote. Wow. And surprisingly, without any hiccups. So not only did it happen smoothly, Richard, it also did something quite contrary to what most people would have predicted. Our productivity has actually gone up. Which was probably bucking any kind of predicted trends you'd see with this. When you dig into it, you understand why, right? People are very focused. They're stuck at a desk. They are also, with isolation, haven't had any distractions. So I think the challenge with COVID is, for us, we've got productivity up and people are working well and the morale is high in the business, but it's still quite novel. The next phase is, what does the blend of office plus remote working look like? Because you can't go back to just pure office working going forward. It also triggers some really interesting conversations.
Yeah, let me just jump in, because I think I've seen this a lot, right? In COVID, there's been a big energy boost of the initial crisis response, all hands on deck. We need to right the ship, make sure we're okay. And as you said, it's also novel. It was novel perhaps for certain companies or certain teams. Obviously not for everybody, but certainly the entire full remote working, it was novel. What I'm seeing now is that there's definitely an energy dip that happens, right? Because suddenly people go, okay, it's not new anymore. We're in this for the long haul. The world's not getting back to normal straight away. There's going to, it's still a bit complicated. And there's a bit of an energy dip, bit of a morale dip, actually a creativity dip potentially, right? Because it's okay when you're in crisis mode, where everyone is laser focused on what they need to deliver. But then suddenly, when everyone takes a bit of a breather,
Yep.
it's that cross-functional collaboration, that creativity, not just working in your own team with your own team calls and, but actually thinking more expansively about the business. Seeing those are the kind of challenges that are now coming down the line for a lot of companies.
Yeah, no, I definitely can see that because, even if you look at your social network now, people joke and say, I can't do another quiz, right? So a lot of the work we do is we have drinks evenings, we've had fancy dress evenings, we've had quiz evenings, just to keep morale together. I jump in on team meetings, so just to hear what people have got to say, how they're feeling. But all of that doesn't have a long-term fix there. I think now the next bit is to contemplate what do you do next to support a remote work stream longer. There's positives too, right, Richard? I think the IT sector has been notorious, like a lot of sectors, in the way you support women in the workplace, particularly people with young families. So there's this now remote working model has destroyed the myth that says you can't be productive at home. I think also we recognize one big thing here. We talk about work-life balance. Well, work has just encroached on life. Now it's about a life-work balance, not a work-life balance. So, when I'm talking to my teams, I say, look, if your kids run into the middle of a conference meeting, don't get embarrassed. That's just what we've enforced here. We brought it to them, not the other way around. So nobody gets stressed. So I think we're all thinking differently, but now it gives us a chance to say, how do you support families in the workplace better by allowing remote working? How do we change our models to support this? Because we don't have an excuse anymore. We've seen it can work. So those barriers have just been torn down. We now have to think differently. We have to architect a different working environment for people going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the decisions that you've been making in this time? Obviously, you had to maybe move everyone to remote work. Have there been decisions which have been tough to make or challenging in some way in this time?
Yeah, look, I chair a company that called Arc Solutions, who are a RegTech company, and because it's B2B, Arc can continue to grow, but they've been through that furlough program. So on one side, as a chairman, I'm seeing what's happening in a business that I'm involved in, and then on the other side, as a CEO, Clario Tech is a B2C company, and when you're at home, you're now dependent on digital more than anything you've ever depended on before in your life. Therefore, we are actually seeing significant growth. So for us, COVID has had a business accelerated impact on us. So it hasn't impacted us in that way.
Right.
However, lots of other things. We've recruited 30 odd people in the last few months. So onboarding people remotely, so they've not seen your really cool offices. They haven't met people in the same way. So trying to align people culturally when you're doing remote interviewing is a lot tougher. But we're learning
how
all
do
of
you
those
do that?
skills and new approaches. Yeah.
How do you do that, Alun? How have you found you can onboard people when there's nowhere to go, right?
Yeah, look, I think it's a combination of things. We show people our offices because our offices in Kiev, for example, have won awards. It's a super cool kind of industrial operation where we have a restaurant that serves several courses for breakfast, lunch, dinner. There's music room, there's English teachers, there's a gym. And it's a super, super cool environment. But we show pictures to people. We get them to talk to a broad range of people in the teams. And we also you can interview, which is really good as well. You can interview with 5, 6 people on a call quite comfortably. So they get that feeling of what type of organization you are just by, in many respects. It was a bit odd before, right, Richard? Or you're only meeting this person on a video call. Now, it's cool that you're meeting a broader group of people on a video call and people don't see it as strange. So I think as human beings, we quickly adapt, right?
It's funny, really, because I mean, as you know, I worked for Cisco for over 10 years and starting in 2006. And to be honest, that were, they were bringing in telepresence and video and WebEx at that time, and they really made a big pivot pretty much back then. And so I remember,
Yep.
stopping flying to the US to do projects, but doing it purely via video, and get this benefit from just having to walk down the corridor to do my meeting rather than to, spend a day on a plane. And it's really interesting. It reminds me of that comment that the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed. Because suddenly
Yes.
it's like people are, like what's happened is everything is kind of caught up with that kind of way of working, which kind of multinationals had already kind of certain multinationals had already kind of adopted. But suddenly it's like every scout troop and, kind of almost any organization at any level, whether it's super local or whatever, has had to experiment and survive and thrive on this technology. So it's super interesting. What about?
Yeah, Richard, you raise a good point because. Yeah.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I said you raise a good point because if you worked remotely, and I'm sure you've done this before, where you might be in a remote office where the majority of people might be in America or something, you always felt like an outlier.
Yeah.
Now, because we've been through a prolonged period where we're all outliers, so we're all part of a bigger hive network now, I don't think anyone's ever going to feel like an outlier in the same way as before. So I think it's had a seismic impact in the way we will regard ourselves going forward. You can be a one-man office now and not feel isolated.
Yes.
So yeah, I think it will trigger a totally different mindset for people.
Yeah, and one of the kind of elements in the Xquadrant approach is talking about success systems, and we always realize looking back that our success has been built on getting certain things right and being able to kind of replicate that almost as an instinct. But I think looking forward, there is going to be that, like, how do we create a success system around working remotely? Yeah, for example, I think it works a lot better when everybody's remote or everybody's in the room, because actually you have a richer interaction when everybody's remote than when you have half and half. But culturally, companies are going to need to think about that. Are we going to have days where we all come in the office, we all go out for lunch, we all do whatever, and then certain days when we're all remote? Or is it going to be kind of pick and choose? I've seen the pick and choose, and actually it creates some interesting dynamics. Like, you never see the whole team because somebody's always, half the team's always out to the office. And so I think there's some care will be needed to actually figure out what a hybrid culture looks like, and what constraints you put on that culture.
Yeah, I did an executive networking remote meeting last week, and with a group called 360 Leaders. So they had an incredible group of people together, Richard. And one of the people on there had founded a business with two other people he'd never met, face to face.
Yeah, interesting.
That's a big switch in thinking, right?
Yeah.
So, but it tells you what this has done, and it also, I think, what's important for people to remember here: nature's just shaken the world, and it shows us to be super vulnerable, right? So when you look out into the future, we no longer can say there's no chance of another pandemic. And we can no longer say that even the major changes in global warming are not going to have potentially huge impacts on our future in some way. So I think the way people think about risk has changed. Therefore, no matter what happens, how back to normal we get in the next, say, from the next 8 months out to the next 2 or 3 years, people are always going to have to remember this and go, I need alternative plans. So that multi-dimensional working model is going to be important we all adopt it, because something could change again and you've got to be ready. It can't catch you out again. So as you just said then, having a model where you should have this multi-dimension is going to be important to you, because it's actually mitigating risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I mean,
I think it should come into our culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things I talk about these days is, is anti-fragility. whether you know this concept. The idea is that
Yeah.
fragile is something that breaks when it comes under stress. Robust, it doesn't change. But anti-fragile, it gets stronger, like the human body. When we stay in a hospital bed or whatever, we wither away. We need some stresses in the system to become healthy and to get stronger. You go to the gym, you build your muscles by subjecting them to stress. And actually, we need to build organizations which are a bit less lean and a bit less minimalist, and where we have some redundancies, and so we don't have single points of failure. Because the minimalist, is great when it's all working in a very stable environment, but if if there's suddenly a shock to the system and that hasn't got any toilet paper or whatever it is in his home, or any food in the fridge, then he's going to be outperformed by the guy who's got a basement full of a bunker right in his basement with stocks. And the flip side is the upside. So you can protect the downside, but you also need to create opportunities to exploit that.
It's strange. I think the analogy I see is I used to chair a company called Company I, which we sold to Symantec, and that was all about fault tolerant systems and storage systems. And in the beginning, if you remember, fault tolerance was a backup, right? Then it became when your machine went down, you had another machine you switched on, and then it switched to hot. It had to literally, in sub-second response times, replace the failed system. Yeah. And I think what we'll see is the same. You have to apply that philosophy to the new world we're in now. What is my hot look like? We were forced into this, made mistakes. We can't afford to make the same mistakes again. We need to be more prepared. And as you've just said, you build some redundancies into that. You have to.
Yeah, and then I think on the upside, as I was saying, the upside is actually how as a company do we get better at being open to chance and to serendipity and new opportunities, and then when we find a good one, to really be able to jump on it and exploit it, to really open ourselves up to the upside of all this volatility. Because again, we lock in too much to plans and everything else and systematize everything, we can almost reduce our ability to grab the opportunity that arises to the left or to the right of our main pathway.
Yeah, look, so we talked about remote working, but also there's a huge acceleration in digital economy here, right, for everyone. So anybody that's traditional bricks and mortar that has either a plan to or partial plan to digitize some aspects of their business will be thinking, how do I accelerate that now? In business, you want to be in control, right, Richard? Now, there's so much of what's just happened that's outside of our control. Different countries' responses to COVID means that access to those countries physically will now be determined by whatever their contamination rates are, whatever the challenges they have, and whatever their rules are, right? It's outside of my control. So suddenly there are aspects of a business that in the past you felt like you were in control of, suddenly you have no control over. So how do you break that risk down and say, I now need an alternative model that doesn't mean I have to fly to that country to have meetings, or it doesn't mean I need my workforce to physically move across boundaries or borders to be able to conduct business? Because what if, for example, America has a longer problem with COVID than Europe, and Europe opens up where America doesn't, or countries ban Britain because we've got some of the worst death rates in Europe at the moment for a longer period than other countries in Europe. All of those things are outside of our control, and therefore you have to mitigate. And digitization is the logical mitigation for this.
Absolutely. So hey, let's get personal a second, Alun. How's this period forced you to grow as a leader? Or perhaps asking it another way, what leadership lessons would you give to yourself, 10 years ago, the younger you 10 years ago? What have you learned over this period, and perhaps over, before, as you've taken on this very different, Ukrainian-based company? What's been your growth path recently?
Do you know, Richard, I was talking to somebody in my team who's an outstanding contributor in our team, and I was talking to her about her personal development recently. Something that you grow into over time as a leader is that your confidence grows because you go through periods where you doubt yourself. And what I have learned is that if I had less doubt about myself and trusted myself earlier, what I'd learned were good lessons, and they were fundamentals about business. And those same fundamentals apply to every business. Different shades in there, but they apply. Good is good, right? Standards are standards, and never doubt those. So you keep the faith in some of those things. It's super important. As a leader, I think my real strength has been to treat people as individuals, right? Nobody is managing. I have 835 people in our organization. I don't manage 835 people. I manage 8 or 9 people. And each one of them manages a group of people. So what you have to do is make sure that you instill in those the things that you think works, and make sure that pushes down through the organization, because you can't do it top to bottom yourself. Yeah. So the key thing for me is everything is personal. It's never not personal. So understand that an individual has different motivations. They have different stresses in their life. You can have broad principles, but to get the best out of people, you need to engage. You need to understand them. You need to understand what motivates them and what challenges they have to overcome, because everyone is different. And if you're prepared to put the time in, you get a lot more out of the people that work for you, and a lot more support for you in the journey you're on as a leader as well. And you get a lot more out of the company that you're leading. And it's more fun because it is personal. I don't care what anybody says. In my mind, it's personal. Right?
It's personal. Yeah.
So a true leader understands that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, almost any issue a business has comes down to people when you go back down the chain, you know. And I mean, to be honest, Alan, I should just get you to do my marketing, I think, because, you know, you just described the thing so perfectly, right? That you've got this big organization, you can't change the mindset and the culture of all those people, but you can work on these 8 or 9 people that you have. And that's the journey of, you know, transformation, right? Creating that into a team and going deep into them, and understanding not just your own skills, but how it's, you know, how what you say, what you do, but how you adjust that to who they are, right? Often as leaders, we just kind of push things out at people and we don't adapt what we do to them, and it doesn't land as well. And then the second level is multiplication.
You have to put the time in. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. You've got to learn and create a language to. I mean, for me, the key part is multiplication. So, you know, you can do it, but that only get to 8 or 9. The magic happens is to when those 8 or 9 are able to replicate what they have learned and experienced with you, with their teams.
Yeah, so Richard, one of the things we did a complete cultural transformation in the business. So we took the management team, because we're becoming consumer champion business, and that means putting a customer first. That's a cultural change. We have a culture of continuous improvement. We have a culture of trust and collaboration. Now, they're words until you enact them. So we did a roadshow around every office. We run multiple events where everyone in the management team owned a part of this. They own part of our cultural DNA. So we called them DNA workshops. What does this mean? And we showed the tone of voice for our company. We explained to people what this actually means every day to you as individuals. And we did it office by office, groups of 12, 14 people at a time. And it was a huge commitment from the management team. But without it, it's just a PowerPoint that you present at a quarterly update, and it just doesn't carry weight through a large organization.
Absolutely.
So, you know what? People said to me, I give a lot of time up to that process, but it was probably the most valuable thing I did for several months, really, was to make that commitment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's what I call the high value activity. You know, you need to put your effort, especially as a CEO, on the biggest levers, right? And transforming the culture has such a massive impact. it's a high value activity, right? Much, it's up there. It's one of the top. So let's just wrap up very quickly. I know we've been speaking for a while, and it's been fascinating, but I want to respect your time. Just going to ask you 3 or 4 quick fire questions, just to find out a bit about what some of the inputs have been into your life and leadership. So what's your favorite book? What books made an impact?
Oh, crikey. Probably To Kill a Mockingbird is one of my favorite ever books. It's not a big book, but it opened up something which is very topical now about equality and championing of equality. But it was a fascinating book and a moment in American literature, which I loved as well. So yeah, that's certainly the book that I always think about if somebody says, tell me what your favorite one is.
Great. What about your productivity tip? What have you found works really well just to help you to get stuff out the door?
Richard, it's a really interesting question because I was talking to my CMO recently, and Dom was head of digital at BBC and mobile operator Sony and Sony Ericsson. And there's so much work to get done when you're going through such a huge transformation in a business. And it's just, don't sweat the small stuff, right? There are things that make fundamental differences in your business. There's stuff that you cannot change. Just leave it for now and focus on where you can have a material impact, where you've got a KPI attached to it. We're about to implement OKRs for the first time. We hadn't done it before because we weren't ready to truly understand what was important, right? Everything was important. Now we've got to break it down going forward into what are we going to focus on for the next 12, 24 months. And OKRs give us that model around that. But up until that point, we'd have probably got those things wrong because you were still in this discovery. And one of my biggest learnings, and I think is, and I've talked to people about this quite a lot, the smartest people don't have all the answers. They have the smartest questions. So keep asking, keep digging, keep discovering, because if you don't first seek to understand, you will make the wrong decisions. But equally, you have to make quick decisions once you do actually get to that point of discovery.
Yeah.
So yeah, do the things that you know you can affect that have a material gain or impact on the business. The small stuff can wait. It can be fixed along the way because you've got to keep moving. And sometimes you can stand still too long while you're thinking you're overwhelmed by too many things.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Last question. What's your favorite kind of leadership quote or motto?
Wow. Okay. There was one, and I can't actually remember the quote. Crikey. It was a Winston Churchill one. I don't want to misquote him. And I actually read it yesterday, and it was just a reminder of something super important. That my favorite quote that I almost put in every presentation that I start with, and the reason I wasn't talking about this as a leadership quote because it's anonymous.
Okay.
And that is that the definition of madness is to keep doing what you're doing and expect a different result. It's the kernel of change, right? You have to do things differently if you want a different result. And people struggle at times to understand that simple philosophy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that quote too. And one of the things I really focus in on in my own business is helping people actually, I call it habit mastery, because you can read all the books and all the great ideas and all the things you can do in your business, but unless you as a leader can actually implement new habits sustainably into your own life and help your team create new team habits, then everything falls away. You kind of have a birth and it falls away and you forget it, and then so actually like learning the kind of components to implementing and creating transformation one habit at a time, I think is really important, because of what you said. It comes down to behaviors, and it comes down to specific behaviors and processes and habits. in very specific moments often. I mean, when I talk with leaders, often it's like, it's not just a general thing, take it back into the personal realm, losing weight is pretty hard to do, but not eating chocolate, at 4 p.m. when I'm feeling snackish becomes something which is quite manageable if you focus in on it, so you can define behaviors and adopt them or erase them if you're very specific.
Yeah, and that's interesting too. So one of my other key philosophies is always aim for the stars, because if you land on the moon, you're a long way up, right? So you have to get people to break through glass ceilings. And sometimes, Richard, you can give people this big vision and they love it, they get behind you. But you've then got to break it down into each incremental change you make rolls up into something huge. But if you only talk about, next year we will grow our business, hopefully, 40%, and we expect to. But if you said that to someone, we're going to grow by 40% next year, let's do it. People look at you and go, oh. But then when you break it down into what do those improvements look like and how do each one of those roll up into that 40%, then everybody knows their role in that piece of improvement that they own. So it is breaking it down into manageable pieces that make that effective large change.
Yeah, I mean, I call it building the bridge. You have people who mentally live in the future and can see all that, and you have people who mentally live in the present, and it's quite hard for the two to meet up. And you have to do that process, as you said, of actually breaking down the vision into what are the steps we're going to take, so that we can actually, and actually people, normally the visionaries don't see all the issues, and the people with all, you can actually see all the practical things to resolve, don't necessarily naturally see where it could all lead them. So that's why the teamwork part is so valuable.
Great comment. Yeah. No, Richard, just spot on with that. And by the way, it's also a recognition that people don't need to be the jack of all trades. You want specialists. You want the people with a great vision, and you want the people with the pragmatic operational delivery, and together they make great teams. Yes. Sometimes I think we beat ourselves up as both leaders, and sometimes we can hold people to too many objectives underneath, where look at what their skill set is and make them focus on that. You can improve their weaknesses, but don't expect them to become a master of something they're not. Be the master of what they really are good at and get them to improve that, and then have other people with those skills to balance the right teams. And I think that's so critical, and people forget that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's that multiplying factor of teamwork. Yeah, absolutely. Not always easy, but again, you got to have this framework to understand how you're going to do it. If you just kind of wing it, it becomes hard. So getting that language and that model in your head, how are we going to get these people to work well together, is super important. Well, hey, Alun, thanks so much for taking the time. It's been really enjoyable as ever and fascinating. And thanks for peeling back the covers a little bit into Clario Tech and running this international business, and just some of your lessons from the last, from, I guess, several decades of leadership expertise. So thank you.
Richard, it's been a pleasure. And sometimes you don't get a chance to think about these things. So you've really provoked some additional thinking in me. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Dal. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's turn to you. If you're a top performer who's already accomplished great things, and yet knows that there's a whole new level of impact and potential open to you, then why don't we get on the phone and strategize on how to get you there? Head over to xquadrant.com/speak to find out more. Until next time, be bold and be purposeful.